Hey guys, Bice Bump here, bringing you this Shadowlands Frost Death Knight Advanced Rotation Guide. Today I'll talk you through the entire rotation of the Frost DK, including both the core rotation as well as the usage of all our cooldowns. This is a bit more in depth when it comes to the rotation in general, so it's for all of you out there that already have some kind of grasp of how to play a Frost DK, but want to understand it more, really. For everyone out there that's running a two-handed weapon, I will cover the bits relevant to you. It's actually the case that the rotation doesn't change specifically because of wielding a two-handed weapon. It's because you choose a build that changes the rotation. So two-handed weapons drives the build choice, which drives the rotation later on. But first of all, let's talk about the core rotation. And it's all about Obliterate, Frost Strike, and Howling Blast. Those are your three core spells, and then everything else is really just cooldowns on top of that. You use your Obliterate to consume your runes, you use your Howling Blast to apply your dot with Rime procs, and use your Frost Strike to use up your runic power. As a Frost DK, you want to prioritize not capping on runes. This means not having more than 3 runes available to you. If you do have more than 3 runes, it means you're losing out on rune recharge, which is a bad thing. This takes priority over capping runic power. So if you have, let's say you have 5 red runes, you have 100 runic power, you would use Obliterate instead of Frost Strike. A quick note on the priority when it comes to the Frozen Pulse talent. Essentially, instead of prioritizing not having more than 3 runes, you would prioritize not having more than 2 runes. So the exact same logic applies. However, instead of setting the threshold at 3, you set the threshold at 2. Simple as that. For AoE scenarios, we do have 2 talents which are brought into the core rotation. It's Frost Scythe as well as Glacial Advance. When it comes to Frost Scythe, this is something you only pick up if you're dual wielding. It's not worth to choose Frost Scythe ever when wielding a two-handed weapon. What happens essentially is that you will just simply spam Frost Scythe in AoE scenarios. This is at 3 or more targets generally. It works well at 2, but it's kind of not that significant at 2 targets. The resource economy makes it so that when spamming Frost Scythe, you essentially won't prioritize spending any runic power at all. It is completely fine to cap runic power in AoE scenarios when using Frost Scythe. We also have Glacial Advance. This is used in AoE scenarios and pretty much is used on cooldown. It's a very powerful AoE ability and what we primarily want to spend runic power if we pick it up. However, it is not very common to pick it up because Gathering Storm is simply too powerful. So it's not very play talent, even though it deals a lot of damage. Alright, so let's move into all our cooldowns. And let's start off with Pillar of Frost, the most iconic of them all. This is a 1-minute cooldown, which gives us a strength buff, and the strength buff increases when we spend runes during its windows. We generally want to make sure that we align all our other cooldowns with Pillar of Frost in these kind of cooldown windows. This means always using Empower Rune Weapon with Pillar of Frost, always using Raise Dead with Pillar of Frost. You can macro it into that. You want to use Trinkets, and you want to use Breath of Sindragosa with Pillar of Frost. Quick comment on Raise Dead. It actually doesn't matter when you use it. The duration is so long that whenever you use Raise Dead, it will be covered with a Pillar, with the assumption that you use Pillar on cooldown. Since the strength gain ramps, you want to try and make sure to use your hard-hitting abilities at the end of its window. This means using Cold Heart and Frostwyrm's Fury at the end of Pillar of Frost generally. I will get to why that isn't the case in every single instance. Right, so that's kind of the core Pillar of Frost, but if we pick up Obliteration, everything changes really. With Obliteration, every single GCD in your Pillar of Frost window is extremely important. You want to utilize it to the maximum. And this is due to the fact that we weave Obliterate and Frost Strikes or Howling Blast to generate Killing Machine procs. A Killing Machine proc is extremely powerful, especially now that Obliterate deals frost damage with Killing Machine, and this essentially means that you want to generate as many Killing Machine procs in your Pillar of Frost window as possible. When we do play Pillar of Frost with Obliteration, we want to activate Pillar of Frost and then immediately generate a Killing Machine proc with either Frost Strike or Howling Blast. You can put this in a macro. I got it up here. It's generally 2 macros. One when you want to initialize Pillar of Frost with a Frost Strike. Another macro if you want to initialize it with a Howling Blast. Both of them will generate a Killing Machine proc. We put it in the macro so that we can optimize the duration of Pillar of Frost to the maximum. Right, we want to spend every single second within it either spending the Killing Machine proc with Obliterate or generating them. If we put it in the macro, we will generate a Killing Machine proc as soon as possible in the game. The Howling Blast macro is actually used in the start of the counter. We will use a naked Howling Blast to generate a Killing Machine proc. This is completely fine, and it can also happen at other points in the fight. You know, generally you will use a Howling Blast with a round proc, or you would use Frost Strike when you have enough runic power. But in case of if you're in an instance where you have lots of runes and no runic power at all, you would actually start off your Pillar of Frost window with a naked Howling Blast. This makes the economy work within the window. You would use up the rune, use and Obliterate right afterwards, and that would give you the runic power necessary to spend a Frost Strike in the next GCD. The weave mechanic in Pillar of Frost essentially means generating killing machines with either Frost Strike or Howling Blast. We prioritize using Howling Blast with rhymes, otherwise we use a Frost Strike. We then consume that killing machine proc with Obliterate and then go back to Frost Strike / Howling Blast. And we want to spend every single GCD in the Pillar of Frost window doing this weaving. Because it's so worthwhile to generate and consume this killing machine procs, it's actually not worthwhile to use Cold Heart or Frostwyrm's Fury within the Pillar and Frost window, at least for single target. Obliterate will push Cold Heart outside of the Pillar Frost window. When it comes to Frostwyrm's Fury, on pure single target, I would probably use Frostwyrm's Fury outside of the Pillar Frost window. However, if you're in an AoE scenario where you can hit multiple adds, I would definitely use Frostwyrm's Fury at the end of Pillar of Frost. A quick note on using Howling Blast or Frost Strike. Generally, we would use the Howling Blast with a rhyme, even though we're capping on runic power. However, if you picked up the Frozen Pulse talent, it is actually technically better to not cap runic power on pure single target. If you're using Avalanche, you would also use the Howling Blast, but if you're using Frozen Pulse, you would prioritize not capping runic power when choosing between a Howling Blast with rhyme or a simple Frost Strike. Quick note on getting natural killing machine procs in your Pillar Frost window. If you do get one, do use it. So even though it breaks your weaving pattern, you know, it's much more worthwhile to use the killing machine proc than spend a Frost Strike Howling Blast to then, you know, just overlap the proc. So sometimes you spend an Obliterate killing machine and then you get an auto before the next GTD. So just be ready for that and press the Obliterate again with that newly generated killing machine proc. We've got Remorseless Winter. This is a 20-second cooldown, which is mainly an AoE cooldown. However, since we pick up the Gathering Storm talent, it's also very powerful in single target. 20 seconds cooldown means that it aligns perfectly with Pillar Frost every third use. And because of that, we want to make sure to use this on cooldown as closely as possible. If you use it every 20 seconds, it will align perfectly with Pillar Frost. If you do miss to use them, it will misalign and you're going to have issues aligning it again. When running Obliteration, it is important to use Remorseless Winter before you move into your Pillar Frost window. As I previously said, every single GCD in Pillar Frost matters with Obliteration, and you don't want to waste one of those GCDs on pressing Remorseless Winter. So just make sure to use Remorseless Winter before you move into your Obliteration window. With Gathering Storm, Remorseless Winter is empowered by rune usage, and you might think that that makes it worth to pull lots of runes before pressing it every time. However, this is generally not worth it, mostly because our rotation doesn't have enough downtime. However, it is actually good practice to dump your runic power before a Remorseless Winter window. So 2, 3, 4 seconds before Remorseless Winter comes off cooldown, just make sure to prioritize using Frost Strike a couple of GCDs. That will actually amp up your runes generally. It will proc runic empowerment and give you a couple seconds to recharge some runes. And that's generally the way you would do it and how it works well. We got Raystad and Sacrificial Pact. They kind of based into the same group. Raystad is very simple to use. It's a flat single target increase that you don't need to care about at all. You can simply macro this into, for instance, your Pillar of Frost macro. However, it's also worth to just use macro it into something like Remorseless Winter, or just use it at start of fight, doesn't matter. Sacrificial Pact. This will explode the ghoul you summon. You want to make sure to use Sacrificial Pact at the end of the ghoul's duration if you use Sacrificial Pact. It so happens that Sacrificial Pact is generally not worth to press on single target unless you're dying. So if you can save yourself with a 25% heal from Sacrificial Pact, do press it, but generally it's not worth on single target. For AoE, you would use it at the end of Raystad window, or you would use it when a group of ads show up. So it's worth to blow up your little Timmy a bit early if it can blow up on a couple of ads that show up. We also got Frostwyrm's Fury. This is such a great AoE cooldown, and it's worth to hold this for whenever there are ads coming through. You want to use this at the end of Pillar Frost window, except if you're running Obliteration. However, if there are ads, it's fine to use it at the end of Pillar of Frost. If you're not using a Pillar of Frost window, it's best to use it when you have a proc of Rune of the Fallen Crusader, the Unholy Strength proc. But as I said, generally if there are ads coming through in a fight, you want to make sure to use Frostwyrm's Fury for those ads. We also have Cold Heart here, kind of similar to Frostwyrm's Fury. It's a very big hard-hitting ability that has quite a lot of long cooldown. It's a bit tricky when using Cold Heart because it depends heavily on the build you're running. So if you're running Obliteration, it is not worth to use Cold Heart in your Pillar of Frost window. The opportunity cost is simply too great. You lose out either on generating a Killing Machine proc or consuming one, and that's very not good. So if you're running Obliteration, just use Cold Heart outside of Pillar of Frost when you have Unholy Strength active and you add 16 plus stacks. That generate. If you hit 20 plus stacks without having an Unholy Strength proc, just use it. Don't sit on 20 stacks for too long. When running Breath of Sindragosa, it's kind of similar use. So just use above 16 stacks when you have Unholy Strength. The fact that Pillar of Frost is 1 minute cooldown makes it so that it doesn't really align with Cold Heart, since Cold Heart reaches max stacks in 40 seconds. What you can do is use Cold Heart at 20 stacks during Pillar, and then use it at 10 stacks outside of it. But that's kind of the same DPS gain of just using whenever you have an Unholy Strength proc. So I think I would recommend just using Cold Heart whenever you have an Unholy Strength proc. If you're running Ice Cap, which a lot of people don't actually do, you would just use Cold Heart at the end of every Pillar. It aligns quite nicely. Lovely. Let's talk about Breath of Sindragosa. And this is quite a tricky cooldown, which has a lot of min-max possibility and requires quite a lot of skill to pull off properly. First of all, what you need to think about is timings. Okay? So when using Breath of Sindragosa, you need to know the boss timings so that you don't end up in a situation where you need to run out of boss range, 10 seconds in your breath window. That will decimate your DPS. Know your boss timings, know when there are abilities that makes you run out of boss range, and don't use Breath of Sindragosa at those timings. Once you figure out that, you need to make sure you pull for your Breath of Sindragosa window properly. Pulling for Breath of Sindragosa just means hitting 60 or 70 runic power plus. Alright, you don't need to pull that much anymore because Breath of Sindragosa itself generates quite a lot of runes, and the early bits of Breath of Sindragosa are already quite resource heavy. So 70 runic power, that's generally what you need. You don't need to care about having lots of runes ready. because Breath of Sindragosa generates 2 of them. Once you pull properly and you activate with Breath of Sindragosa, you want to make sure to not spend runic power on anything else. If you hit a Frost Strike in your Breath of Sindragosa window, you made a very grave mistake. What you generally want to do is just hit Obliterate over and over again. At the start of Breath window, you will have lots and lots of resources. This means that you actually want to spread out your Obliterate so you don't cap on runic power. If you're above 70, wait for that one tick to get you below 70 runic power and then hit Obliterate. If you're good at this, you will time every Obliterate just after Breath of Sindragosa ticks. Outside of this, or after a couple of seconds, you will hit a period where you just use Obliterate on the GCD. Alright, Obliterate over and over again. After this, you hit the Resource Starve phase. This is when you kind of want to fish for runic empowerment procs. You know, you're sitting on one rune, Breath of Sindragosa is taking at 30 runic power. You just hope that the next tick will provide the rune to use Obliterate. Just, even though you can't use the Obliterate, just spam that button, because if you get a runic empowerment proc, you want to use it as soon as possible. So when you activate Breath of Sindragosa, it's a good idea to use this macro up here. It just puts lots and lots of cooldowns into a single button, which is nice. It frees up all your keybinds. It also makes it so that you can't cancel Breath of Sindragosa when you press it. That's what the exclamation mark is for. It also uses Empower Rune Weapon, and that's kind of okay if your Breath of Sindragosa window is quite short. You will want to use Empower Rune Weapon early. However, if your Breath window is hitting 25-30 seconds, especially when you pick up the Kultiras legendary, you do want to delay Empower Rune Weapon. Okay? It's not worth to use it at the start because you already have so many resources. There's no purpose to generate more and just overcap. So if you have long breath windows, leave out Empower Rune Weapon from this macro and use it individually a bit later. Another tip is to use Anti-Magic Shell smartly. You know, using Anti-Magic Shell and soaking some magic damage will generate runic power, and this can significantly lengthen your breath window, even to that extent that it's a good idea to sync your breath window for phases when you can soak magic damage to gain runic power. But generally, you know when your boss is going to use his magic damage ability, use Anti-Magic Shell during your breath window to get that runic power and extend your breath window. Final comment is that if you are Venthyr and you're running a Swarming Mist, especially in AoE, this will generate a significant amount of runic power. So in an AoE scenario, you would press Swarming Mist when you're dropping like below 50, and it would just bring you straight back up into a healthy runic power state. But yeah, that's only really true for AoE. On single target, you would hit Swarming Mist a bit earlier because it doesn't generate as much runic power. Alright, Empower Rune Weapon. I mentioned this a couple of times already. It's a bit of an annoying cooldown because the cooldown itself doesn't really make sense. It's 1 minute 45 seconds at level 60, and this doesn't align with anything in our kit. What we actually do is just use Empower Rune Weapon with Pillar of Frost, so we will always delay it at 15 seconds. If you're running Breath of Sindragosa, as I just said, you want to use Empower Rune Weapon with Breath of Sindragosa. If your window is quite long for Breath of Sindragosa, you want to delay it a little bit. If you're not running a Breath of Sindragosa, you simply delay it 15 seconds to use with every second Pillar of Frost. It's actually the haste you care about in that state. You don't care about overcapping your resources, you will do that, that's completely fine. But the haste will empower your Obliteration window, which is what's important. Final 2 cooldowns, Horn of Winter and Hypothermic Presence. These are not used very much because they're not that great. They're generally just used on cooldown. They give you some resources. If you're running Breath of Sindragosa, you want to use these when you start to drop a little bit on resources in your Breath of Sindragosa window. So when you hit that phase, when you're spamming Obliterates, it would be a good idea to press these cooldowns to kind of beef up your resource a little bit. Right, let's go on to the Covenant class abilities. We've got Swarming Mist. This is generally used on cooldown. It aligns very well with your Pillar of Frost window, which buffs it because it's based on your AP. Use Swarming Mist before Pillar of Frost if you're running Obliteration. That's crucial. You don't want to spend a GCD in your Pillar of Frost window pressing a Covenant class ability when you just want to generate Killing Machine procs. When you're running Breath of Sindragosa, as I just said, especially in AoE scenarios, hold on to this ability for a little bit. Use it when you're running a bit low on resources. Abomination Limb, use it on cooldown. It aligns very well with Pillar of Frost, and it's a great thing to just use it to GTD before Pillar of Frost. Death's use it on cooldown. It's a 30-second cooldown. Just use it, and it will allow every second use with Pillar of Frost, which is nice. You don't need to care too much about spamming Obliterate afterwards. You will get a small strength buff. It doesn't really make sense to focus on like making sure you have lots of runes before using it. It's completely fine. Just drop it down. You will use some Obliterate afterwards. Don't care too much about it. In AoE, if you're running Frost Scythe, it's actually a bit different. Then you want to pop down your Death's and use your Obliterate until you hit the 8% strength cap. Once you hit that, you want to go back to spamming Frost Scythe. That's the only kind of difference. But this scenario doesn't happen very often in raiding, so it's not that important. And you wouldn't really run Frost Scythe anyway in raiding, so don't just bring that to your Mythic Plus. But that's for a later video. Finally, Chakra Worthy. 1 minute cooldown, and it's very well Pillar Frost. Just use this GCV before activating Pillar Frost. That's it. Alright, final topic. Let's talk about openers. For Breath of Sindragosa, I recommend going into triple Obliterate. Use any Rime procs with Howling Blast if you get any. After those triple Obliterate, just instantly go for the Breath of Sindragosa macro. You got the Remorseless Winter in there already, so just use that. Follow up with your Covenant ability generally, and then also follow up with a Naked Howling Blast if you haven't got the Frost Fever up yet. It's actually worth to use the Naked Howling Blast without the Rime proc just to keep your dot up. For Obliteration, it's quite a lot different. We start off with Remorseless Winter. This can be used, when we're running into the boss. So just before you hit it, you press off Remorseless Winter, and it kind of frees off a GCD in your rotation. Once we end melee, if your first melee gives you a Killing Me Shriek proc, spend that on an Obliterate. If that doesn't happen, just go into the Pillar Frost macro with the Naked Howling Blast. So that will instantly generate the Killing Me Shriek proc, and then move you straight into the Obliteration weaving. Okay, so that was everything I wanted to cover today. I hope that was useful for all you Frost DKs out there. If you're running two-hander, you will most often pick up the Obliteration build, so that will have been what's been most important from this video for you. If you have any comment or questions, do leave them down below. If you liked this video, do give it an upvote. If you disliked it, do give it a downvote. Also, do consider subscribing if you want to see more of this kind of content. You can always find me on the Acros Discord. I'm more than happy to answer any pings or direct messages. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more content. Thank you.